In this lesson, we're going to go over the most frequently tested and highest yielding areas of Article 9 secured transactions on the bar exam in 60 minutes or less. Or in other words, we're going to go over the absolute must-know stuff in Article 9 secured transactions for the bar exam, which historically, if we look at the data, is going to be attachment, perfection, continuation, and the priority rules. Typically, these are the areas where we're going to have the most opportunities to collect points in Article 9 secured transactions on the bar exam. So these are the areas I'm really going to try to break down as best as I possibly can over the next 60 minutes or so. But with that, we can just set our timer to 1 hour. Ready, set, go. So the clock has officially started. We can jump right into secured transactions under Article 9 of the Uniform Commercial Code. Right, so the best place to start here has got to be, well, what is an Article 9 secured transaction, right? I find that it's best to kind of visualize the transaction, big picture, and then we can kind of start breaking down all of the individual analyses, right? So the first thing that often pops into my mind anytime I'm thinking about Article 9 secured transactions is going to be the pawn shop, right? Pawn shops deal in Article 9 secured transactions probably on a daily basis, right? So how does this work in the pawn shop context? Well, let's say that we have someone out there, some guy needs $10,000, right? There's an emergency, he needs $10,000 and he needs it fast. Well, that guy can go into a pawn shop, right? And he can ask the pawn shop for a $10,000 loan. Right? You can say, come in and say, hey, look, I need $10,000. I've had this emergency. Can you loan me $10,000? Well, the pawn shop, right, they're going to consider this. They're not going to just give some guy who walked into their shop $10,000 and a bag full of cash and say, sure, take this, go use it and, just pay us back when you can, right? They're not going to do that, right? They're not going to give somebody $10,000 cash and just hope that they come back later and repay them the debt, right? The pawn shop's going to want to secure the transaction, right? They're going to want to protect that loan they're giving this guy, right? So how can they do that? Well, the most often way that we see this play out in the pawn shop is the pawn shop's going to say, sure, we'll give you a $10,000 loan, but you have to give us possession of something of value, right? You're going to have to turn over possession of some item that belongs to you that has value, right? And we need something that's worth $10,000 from you. So that way, if you default on this loan, if we give you $10,000 and you ride off into the sunset, we never hear from you again, no problem, because we have this item from you now that's worth $10,000. So we can sell that item and make back the $10,000 that you defaulted on. Right? So we call this item collateral, right? Where the debtor is putting up collateral and letting the creditor have possession of that collateral would be the pawn shop context, right? So in that example, imagine that the guy doesn't come in empty-handed. He comes in with a $10,000 diamond ring, right? A diamond ring that's worth $10,000. Well, the pawn shop can take that diamond ring, they can take possession of the diamond ring from this person who came in and then issue the debtor now a $10,000 loan. So now the debtor takes that $10,000 and goes out and uses it however he wants, right? But the key is now the creditor, the pawn shop, is protected, right? If this guy defaults, if the debtor defaults on that $10,000 loan, they're okay, right? Worst case for the pawn shop, they can sell that diamond ring for $10,000 and make their money back. Now, of course, the pawn shop's hoping, right, that this guy's going to go out, he's going to take the $10,000 loan, and he's going to come back later and repay the debt plus interest, right? So say it's a 20% interest rate. The pawn shop's hoping that this guy's going to take the $10,000 loan, he's going to come back later and pay them back the $10,000 plus $2,000 in interest, right? So he comes back with $12,000. The pawn shop nets $2,000 in profit, right? Once the debtor's obligations of the debt have been fulfilled, right? The pawn shop's going to return the diamond ring to the debtor, right? Everybody goes home happy. Right now, of course, on the bar exam, that's typically not what we're going to see, right? Problems are going to arise in the transaction, and that's what we're going to break down in a lot of detail in this video, right? But big picture, that's kind of what a secured transaction looks like, right? Now, that is the pawn shop context. It is important to recognize that the secured party, right, the creditor, does not have to actually take possession of the collateral, right? A pawn shop typically takes possession of the collateral, right? They're going to hold on to that diamond ring until the debt obligation is fulfilled. But that's not always the case, right? You could go to a loan, or you could go to a bank potentially. Say you need $10,000, right? Some banks will allow you to pledge title to your car, right? So you can pledge basically your car, right? Ownership of your car as collateral to a bank in exchange for a $10,000 loan. But the bank might not take your car. They're going to let you hold on to, continue to use your car. So the debtor gets to keep possession of the collateral, right? And that is another way that a secured transaction under Article 9 can play out, right? Where the debtor is actually going to hold on to possession of the collateral, right? The debtor just pledges the collateral and then holds on to possession of it, right? And we'll see that this is where we can really get some rich fact patterns on the bar exam, right? And there's two fact patterns in particular that we want to look out for here, where the debtor actually has possession of the collateral. Right, we have continuation fact patterns and priority fact patterns. And I'm just going to big picture this for you so you can kind of see where we're going, right? And these are the two most common tested fact patterns on the bar exam in Article 9. So we really want to be comfortable with issue spotting this on the bar exam and analyzing it. Right, we have the continuation fact pattern. This would be where the debtor actually pledges the collateral, right? So say a debtor goes into the bank, pledges his car, right? Title to his car. His car's worth $10,000 to the bank. In exchange, the bank gives him a $10,000 loan, right? So the debtor walks out of the bank with his $10,000 loan and then immediately takes the car that he just pledged as collateral to the bank, to the creditor, and disposes of that car, right? He sells the car to some buyer in the parking lot of the bank. Well, the question is going to be whether the bank ultimately can repossess the car from the buyer in the event that the debtor defaults on the loan, right? Does the security interest in that collateral continue when the debtor disposes of the collateral, right? So we'll see fact patterns where we actually see the debtor disposing of collateral that he's pledged to a creditor, right? That's a continuation fact pattern. That's a continuation issue. We'll want to know how to analyze that. The other thing that a debtor can do that we want to look out for where the debtor has possession of the collateral is when the debtor pledges the same piece of collateral, the same item, to two or more different creditors, right? Say in this example, right, our debtor goes to creditor number one. Let's say our debtor goes to bank number one and pledges his car as collateral. In exchange, gets a $10,000 loan. He walks out with the $10,000, drives across the street to a bank that's across the street, and pledges his car to creditor number two in exchange as collateral in exchange for another $10,000 loan, right? So he's pledged the same piece of collateral, his car, to two different creditors. Well, of course, there's going to be an issue when this debtor defaults on both loans. Say the debtor runs out of money, he's insolvent, so he defaults on his loan to creditor one and creditor two. The question is going to be, well, which creditor has priority to the collateral, right? Bank number one, bank number two, creditor number one, creditor number two, and we'll see we have priority rules that we go through. Now, in either event, right, whether we see a continuation fact pattern, we see a priority fact pattern, step number one is always going to be attachment and perfection. We do not do a continuation analysis or a priority analysis until we've done our attachment and perfection analysis. So this, right, this first column of attachment and perfection is always step one on the bar exam, right? We always start here with attachment and perfection. And the good news is, I know secured transactions can get complicated. It can be intimidating for students because we're dealing with really kind of unfamiliar terms, right? Most of us probably aren't dealing in a whole lot of Article 9 secured transactions on a daily basis, so it can be a little bit intimidating. But the good news on the bar exam with Article 9 is there's easy ways to accumulate points. Even if you're kind of confused, you're lost for a second, you don't know what's going on, always a good idea is to start with attachment and perfection, right? You want to see whether the security interest has attached and whether it's been perfected. If you do that, you know how to do those two analyses. If you just start doing that for each security interest, right? For each creditor, basically, for each creditor's security interest in the collateral, you do an attachment and perfection analysis, you're going to get the ball rolling, you're going to start getting some easy points, right? And these analyses aren't actually that bad, right? So step one, I would always recommend doing attachment and perfection because it's kind of like laying the foundation. You're not going to be able to do most of the other analyses until you've done attachment and perfection. We're going to see that the continuation rules and the priority rules depend on whether a security interest has been perfected. And we can't determine whether a security interest is perfected unless we know whether the security interest has attached, right? Transitive property, that means we have to discuss attachment to get to perfection, to get to either continuation or priority rules or both, right? All a long-winded way of saying, look, on the bar exam, when you get to secured transactions, you want to identify each creditor's security interest in the collateral and do a quick attachment and perfection analysis. It's an easy way to get points. So let's jump into how you do that, right? What does attachment and perfection look like? And one other note I'll make before we jump into it is just the idea of, I think we've established what a secured transaction looks like and how a debtor pledges collateral. It is important to recognize that there can be different types of collateral, right? Typically on the bar exam, we're dealing with different types of goods being pledged as collateral, right? A person is pledging a bicycle as collateral. A person is pledging their car as collateral. They're pledging some jewelry as collateral. They're pledging some, rare item that they own, some antique as collateral, right? We typically see goods, and goods, right, are movable objects, right? Objects that are movable at the time of attachment, which we're going to talk about in a second, right? So typically we're dealing with goods, right? And it is important to recognize that there are some different categories of goods. We have just regular goods. We have consumer goods, which are goods that are used for personal, family, or household purposes. And we have inventory, which is usually more in the commercial setting where goods are actually being stored, right, for future sale or future rentals, right, for future leasing, right? So we can have consumer goods, we can have inventory goods, we can have just regular goods, and sometimes the distinction between those categories can be important in these analyses, right? So we'll talk about that though as we work through it. It's also important to recognize though that while goods is probably the most often type of collateral we're going to see on the bar exam, you could see other things being pledged as collateral. Most commonly outside of goods would be accounts, right? In the commercial setting, the accounts of a debtor's accounts basically can be pledged as collateral. This is basically the debtor of the debtor, right? We'd see this again more in the commercial setting, right? Imagine that somebody owes you $100,000, right? And you've agreed that they're going to pay you a $10,000 installment payment every month for 10 months. You can actually pledge that debt, that account receivable, what this person owes you, that $10,000 a month, as collateral, right? And that can raise some unique issues. We're not going to get too much into pledging accounts as collateral in this lesson because it's less tested, but it is something I would be aware of, and below the video we'll put some information on what to do if you see a person pledging accounts as collateral, right? But we're going to primarily focus on when goods are being pledged as collateral. Remember, regular goods, consumer goods, or just inventory goods. Right, but with that, we can jump into attachment. I think that's enough big picture overview stuff. Let's get into some of the analyses here. So it's important to recognize that the first thing we do, like in contract law, right, we have to make sure that it is enforceable, right? That our security interest is actually enforceable against the debtor, right? The creditor can't just go out and start repossessing property and selling that property that belongs to another person unless there's an enforceable security interest, right? And the way we determine whether there's a enforceable security interest is whether that security interest has attached to the collateral, right? We need attachment. We need that security interest, that protection for the creditor, right, to actually attach to the collateral that's being pledged by the debtor. And there's going to be three requirements here. Number one, we're going to say that the creditor basically has extended value to the debtor, right? This is worded under 9-203 as value has been given, right? But this is value has been given to the debtor, right? Number two, the debtor has rights in the collateral. And number three, a 9-203B3 condition is met. So the good news here is element 1 and 2 for attachment is usually really easy to get through. Each of these is usually one sentence, right? The value that has been given to the debtor is going to be the loan itself, right? If the creditor is giving somebody a $10,000 cash loan, right, well then that's your value, right? The $10,000 proceeds of the loan is the value the creditor is extending to the debtor. That's usually very easy, kind of one sentence, you can get through this element. Number two, the debtor actually does have to have rights in the collateral, right? So obviously, the debtor can't pledge property that belongs to somebody else, right? The debtor has to have rights in the collateral. Now, it's important to recognize this doesn't have to be 100% ownership, right? Whatever rights in the collateral the debtor has, he can pledge those rights as collateral. So if he has some sort of co-ownership or, whatever it is, whatever his interest is, whatever the right the debtor has in that piece of property, he can pledge those rights as collateral. But he does have to have some rights in the collateral. Usually on the bar exam, though, we see the debtor outright owns the object that he's pledging as collateral, right? Again, this is usually a very straightforward analysis, but we do want to make sure, right, the debtor isn't pledging some piece of property he has no rights to, right? You can't pledge someone else's property as collateral. Not going to work. So both of these elements are usually pretty straightforward. The third one can get a little bit trickier, right? We need a 9-203B3 condition to be met, which is usually going to be either authentication or possession, right? So 9-203B3A would be authentication, where the debtor has actually authenticated a security agreement in writing that provides a description of the collateral, right? So we'll see that we have a security agreement, right? In some fact patterns, we're going to have a security agreement between the debtor and the creditor, right? That lays out kind of the terms of the secured transaction. And we're going to see that in order for that agreement to attach, right, for this security interest to attach to the collateral and become enforceable against the debtor, right, that security agreement has to be authenticated by the debtor, right? Meaning basically that the debtor has signed the agreement, right? You kind of think about this idea of authentication as we need evidence, we need proof that the debtor did intend to enter into this agreement that will usually be satisfied by where the debtor has signed the agreement, the security agreement. Important to recognize too that the security agreement has to provide a description of the collateral, and it has to be a sufficient description, right? If the security agreement just says, look, the debtor is pledging all of his personal property as collateral, right? That's not going to work. It has to specifically identify what personal property is actually being pledged as collateral, right? That's actually been tested before on the bar exam. So we do want to make sure with our security agreement, right, if the 9-203B3 condition we're talking about is authentication of a security agreement, that security agreement does provide a sufficient description of the collateral being pledged. that would be important. But authentication usually just requires that the debtor has signed the security agreement. If we have a security agreement in writing that provides a description, a sufficient description of the collateral, and the debtor has authenticated that security agreement by signing it, right? If these other two elements are met, we have value has been given, the debtor has rights in the collateral, and the debtor has authenticated that security agreement. The security agreement provides description of the collateral sufficiently. Then at that point we have attachment, right? The security interest is going to be attached to the collateral. Now it's enforceable against the debtor, right? If the debtor defaults on the loan, creditor can go after that collateral, right? Repossess it and sell it to recover the cost of the loan. Right, the next way that's important to recognize under 9-203B3 is going to be 9-203B3B, which is possession, right? If the secured party takes possession of the collateral pursuant to the debtor's security agreement, right, we'll say that that satisfies 9-203B3B, right? So this would be the pawn shop example, right? Where the secured party is actually taking possession of the collateral. So if the secured party, the creditor, is actually taking possession of the collateral, right, that satisfies this third element. In that case, we don't need authentication of a written security agreement. The security agreement could be oral between the creditor and the debtor, right? We're going to say that taking possession, the secured party taking possession, shows evidence that we had this agreement in place, right? Why else would the debtor be giving possession of his $10,000 diamond ring to the pawn shop, right? That's going to be sufficient if the secured party is taking possession of the collateral. That's the pawn shop example. That's another way to satisfy 9-203. There's some other conditions here under 9-203B3, but authentication and possession are by far and away the most commonly tested, right? So those are the ones we really want to be aware of. Again, though, we do need all three of these elements to be met in order to have attachment, in order for that security interest to attach to the collateral, which means that security interest is now enforceable, right? So without attachment, again, big picture, recognize that if the security interest never attaches to the collateral, then the creditor is not going to be able to go after that collateral, right? It's not enforceable. That security interest is not enforceable unless it attaches. Right, so the creditor really needs to make sure that there is attachment. Otherwise, right, the creditor is not going to be able to go out and repossess the property, repossess the collateral, and try to sell it in the event of a default. Right, in order to do that, we need attachment, right? Attachment is what makes the security interest enforceable against the debtor, and those are our three elements. Right, so after we discuss attachment, right, and this is always step one, we're always going to start with attachment. Right, well, is the security interest enforceable against the debtor? Right, we start with attachment 9-203. After we do attachment, thank you so much for watching this video preview of our Bar Blitz video series. If you would like to see the conclusion of this video and gain full access to our entire Bar Blitz video library, which includes coverage of the most frequently tested and highest yielding areas of law in each bar exam subject, we invite you to head over to our website and join the thousands of law students who have already enrolled in Studicata Bar Review. To get started with your no-risk free trial today, simply click the link in the description box below or visit www.studicata.com.